Right, yes. So, what would you like to know, Chris?
Just tell the audience from the start, I guess, how you got into everything.
Right, well, it started at a young age, basically, when I'd been upstairs in the back bedroom where I wasn't supposed to be, and they were looking for Christmas presents because we all knew, well, me and my sister knew that that's where Santa Claus left, presents upstairs in the back bedroom. So I've been upstairs looking around, um, and I shouldn't have been. And my grandma and my mum were downstairs, and I could hear them talking and then shouting up, Russell, are you upstairs? What are you doing? And I says, yeah, I'm coming down. And I thought I'd better hurry up and get out of this bedroom, sort of like, because I'm not supposed to be there. So as I'm now walking to go out of the bedroom, I looked out of the window and I could see this like figure of a human in some kind of pilot suit, like grey silver pilot suit with an helmet on. And he came through the gate, and there's this object, silvery white, behind him. And I'm looking, I'm thinking, is that a spaceman? At first, I thought it was dustbin man, like picking up the dustbins. So I looked down at him and I thought to myself, that's not the dustbin man. He's got an helmet on. He must be a spaceman. So I sort of like put my hand up to wave at him. And this thing looked up at me and it half sort of like put its hand up and were looking up at me sort of thing. So by this time, my mum and my grandma downstairs were shouting, come on, get down these stairs now. Sort of like, what you doing up there? And I think they knew that I were looking for Christmas presents. They're not daft at the mums and grandmas. So I shouted, come in. So I looked and he's now walking backwards and behind this object. And I'm looking and the object started going from side to side like so and then up. So I looked up and I mean, these are big windows and I'm only little at 4 year old and I'm looking up and thinking, wow, you know, was that a flying saucer sort of thing? So then I heard my mum shout, come on, get down these stairs now. So yeah, I'm coming. So I went into the bathroom and then I went downstairs. And my grandma says, you little monkey, what have you been up to? Sort of like up those stairs, she says. And I says, oh, just in the bathroom. She said, you're a long time in the bathroom. Now sit down and I'll make you a drink of tea. So I think they must have known what I was doing, like looking for Christmas presents, sort of like. So that was the first sort of like strange encounter with something which looked like some kind of like spaceman with like a silvery grey suit and his helmet on. Um, then I was in my teens and I was with a group of friends and we all lived down this back street. And it was summer holidays. We're all on holiday from school. And we're playing a game of hide and seek. And as usual, I was the first to get caught. So I went and sat down at the top of the street, and they had this tarmac down, and there's like a nail sticking out. Don't ask me how, but there's a nail sticking out of the tarmac. And sort of like, anyway, I was sat there looking and playing with this nail, trying to pull this nail out of tarmac. And I looked up, and this object moved from the left to the right hand side. And it was moving slow, and it was massive. It was a big object. And it was like an orange, but it was like white and red, white, red, white, red, all the way around, like the segments. And so I'm looking at this object. So I just jumped up and shouted, look, there's a UFO. And all the others, sort of like I could hear them shouting one by one. shut up, just because you've been caught, don't say we want to be caught. And I said, no, I'm not joking. I said, there's a UFO. And like one by one, like heads started popping up over edges and over gates, and from behind walls and the garage, like my mates were all hiding and looking. And they came running up to where I was, and they just could not believe what they were looking at. I couldn't believe what we were looking at. And one or two of the older ones were like saying, no, it's not a UFO. And I said, yeah, it is. And they said, oh, it's not. It's a balloon. It's an hot air balloon. I said, really? I said, look how big it is and how close it is to us. Where's the basket then? And where's the people in the basket? And they didn't like this, of course, because I was younger and I'm answering them back. And I'm showing them that, what they're saying is wrong. Because, yeah, it's very close, it's very big, and something so big and so close to us, if it was a hot air balloon or any other balloon, you will be able to see. But definitely not a hot air balloon, because there was no tab around, and no braces to hold the basket in place, etc. And they all ran across the road and started, following this object. Anyway, by the time I got across the road, they were walking back, and I said, where's it gone? And they said it went into a cloud. So we went back and we're all talking about this because, I mean, it was a big thing. I mean, there must have been at least 15 witnesses. I mean, this was a big thing. Anyway, one of my friends, he turned around and said, he says, this is important, this. He said, we should call this something, or where you saw it something. So I said, well, I was sat there, and I says, and there's a nail sticking out of the ground there. I said, why don't we call this nail point? So anyway, we said, yeah, we'll call it nail point. Now, 15 years later, I was in a shop. I became ill, and I started working for myself. So I got this shop, and I haven't been open long when in comes my friend from back in the day when he was with us, when we saw this object. And the first thing he said, all right, Russ, I said, all right, how are you doing? He said, all right. And he said he'd just come out of the army, and and is it my shop? And I said, yeah. And he said, here, Russ, he says, do you remember Nail Point? And I said to him, how could I forget it? You know? So, I mean, for him, 15 years later, and I hadn't seen him for 15 years, right? Yeah. For him to ask me if I remembered, that day Nail Point, that must have left some impression in his mind. 15 years later, sort of like, and we were young kids, and it was still there. And, the first thing he more or less said, apart from, all right, Russ, is this your shop? How are you doing? Was, remember Nail Point and that UFO? And I met other people as well. It was that time. And, one or two have said, oh, yeah, we've seen you in papers and on television talking about UFOs. And I says, yeah, well, we saw a UFO as well, didn't we? And I said, yeah. I said, that's the point. I says, how many of us saw that day that UFO? I said, it's not in my imagination, is it? And they said, oh, no, definitely not in your imagination. And I says, and I aren't bigging myself up. I'm not saying, look what I saw. I'm saying, look what we all saw that day, you know. So it must have had some impact on people to remember 15 years later, and they're still talking about it. And that was that must have been sort of like 20 years ago. You know what I mean? So now that's like 35 years ago now, you know? So obviously, this is why I had an interest. You know, my dad also was at work on his tea break with his workmates and a couple of his brothers at work there. And they'd all seen a cigar-shaped object. And when I started researching this subject, I went back into old archives from the library, and I found one or two pieces in the paper about UFO reports where my dad had seen this object, and it was known as the Fackley torpedo. So when my dad came in from work and he was talking about this and telling me mum, and I was sat there listening to him, you know, as soon as you mention UFO, you know, and flying saucers, when you're a youngster, even when you're older, you know, wow, UFOs, you know, like, and it's a subject what a lot of people now are really, really, you know, looking at seriously. So in a way, you know, sort of like that was one of the first reports that I'd come across, and it was from my dad. Although he didn't actually see the UFO, his brothers and his workmates that were behind him were looking. By the time he turned around, the thing had gone into a cloud, you know. So, I mean, that's like, you know, the earliest I remember about, you know, my dad. And my dad wasn't a fool, you know. My dad was in atom bomb tests, in secret atom bomb tests, you know. And there were a big question. Somebody said to me, could it have been because your dad were in an atom bomb test that these things, you know, sort of like are looking at you because your DNA somewhere, if my dad's near an atom bomb going off and then he has a child, you know, sort of like, i.e. me, you know, could it have altered something to do with my biological system, you know, that's basically shouting out to them, oh, look, there's somebody here that's sort of like been around nuclear power, and they're having a look to see, you know, am I some kind of a threat to them, or, you know, sort of like, if you see what I mean. It might not be, but, you know. So anyway, that was the earliest UFO report that, you know, I'd heard, and it was from my dad. So then we're getting into my teens then, and I'd left school on the Friday, and I started work on the Monday. I worked for an American company used to make clothes for the GIs, and you know, do all the laundry in England for all the American troops, you know, originally. And I was 16 years old, and I had a motorbike bought for me, part for me my birthday and part for Christmas. So I used to go to work on my motorbike, a trail bike, a Suzuki, and I'd come home and I'd have my tea, and then I'd go out, and there were areas where we could go and we could do trail bike riding, you know. And most of the time, I'd just go out riding around and calling to see friends, and, you know, but most of them wasn't as fortunate as me. You know, they didn't have motorbikes on the road, you know. I was really lucky. So on this particular evening, I was riding home, and I was going around this corner, and basically in front of me was this. I can only describe it as a massive big tunnel, and I'm slowing down. I'm thinking, I can't remember this tunnel, like a couple of nights ago, and it was massive. And I thought, this doesn't work right, sort of like, because for a tunnel to be here now, it'd have taken weeks because it looked huge, it was the full size of the road. Anyway, I went into this tunnel, and the next thing I was in this room, and I was sat in this chair, and I'm looking, and there's these shadows moving around, and I'm sort of like looking all around at these shadows and looking up, and I'm looking up at this movement, and there must have been about 6 of these creatures. They were huge. They must have been 15 foot tall. And they were like Nosferatu, like bald, tall creatures, like the Dracula, the French Dracula, is it? And the next thing, I had my head moved forward and an injection in my back and my neck, and I moved other way, and then this tube put into my mouth, down my throat, and attached was like these wires and this helmet. And we seemed to be elevated then. And I say we because there were other people in the same scenario at the side of me, both sides, and I'm looking and flipping it. There's a lot of people in the same sort of like position. And in front is this massive screen. And all of a sudden, we started getting information in this helmet, what they'd put on. And it was giving us all information. It were like battle skills, basic battle skills and weaponry, and about weapons and about enemies, and the other enemies that are working alongside these aliens that were our enemies. And I'm just thinking to myself, where am I? I was quite frightened, if I'm honest about it, And I've been struggling because when you have something put down your throat, into your mouth and put down your throat, you can imagine, not a very good thing, to have happen whatsoever, Anyway, so the next thing I knew, I was back on my motorbike, and it's almost stalling and juddering because it's like it's still in gear. So now I pull my clutch in, knock down the gears, and I'm just starting, and I thought I better look behind me. So I'm looking behind me to see if there's any cars behind me, because I'm thinking, if I'm not careful, I'm going to get knocked off my motorbike here. And I thought, don't look round. Well, I had to look round, obviously, just in case there's any vehicles behind me. But I'm not wanting to look round, and I'm not wanting to see where I've just come from, if you know what I mean. Because I was still sort of like, I could say I was terrified, to be quite honest. So I looked around, and there were no cars. So I put my throttle back, just missed this wall, and carried on my journey home. So anyway, I'm on my way home now, and I pulls into my garden. Well, it was like a little drive, sort of like not a garden, but a backyard, And I parked my bike up, and I noticed there were no lights on in the house. And I thought, that's unusual, because when I get in, even if it's been late at 12 o'clock, and I was told, if it's work days, get in for 11. You've got work the next day, So anyway, I park my bike up and I'm looking, no lights on. Anyway, I'm just knocking on the door when an irate mum opens the door with a curlers in, sort of like looking at me. And, what time do you call this? Oh dear. And I said, I don't know. Why? You don't know? She says, are you wrong in your head? How do you mean you don't know? I said, well, I don't know. I haven't got a watch on. She said, well, I suggest, she says, you go get a cheap watch from the shop, she says, and get in at a right hour, a reasonable hour. Anyway, my grandma's downstairs now, and I'm thinking, oh dear, this is double trouble, you know? First your mum, and now your grandma, you know what I mean? So she asked where I'd been, and, what time do you call this? So I told her, well, I don't know, like I've said, I haven't got my watch on. So apparently it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, almost 4 o'clock in the morning. And sort of like, what are you doing now? You don't drink, you're not old enough to drink, and so where have you been? And I says, I think one time I made an excuse, well, I run out of petrol. And then the other time, I think I had a flat tire. I had to get some air put in my tire. So, of course, my mum is not really happy. So she said, well, I think the best thing for you to do is, she says, you're up, she said, in 4 hours and at work, she says. I think you need to get in and now and get to bed, she said, because she says, you've got work in the morning. So I'm sort of like just getting a good clip around the back of the lug hole, as we say in England, and sent on my way to bed, And then my grandma said to me, Mum, oh, leave him. He's only young. So anyway, that was the first very strange encounter that I had with these tall creatures, in this room, like Nosferatu, sort of like bald type aliens. And then basically what happened was it was the same kind of scenario. I were out on my motorbike, and sort of like after tea, I'd go out and have a ride around, and I'd come across this tunnel, and it was almost, I wouldn't say every time I went out on my motorbike, but it was more often than not. And I'd come across this tunnel in the middle of the road again, and I would end up again being sat in this chair and have this injection at the back of my neck. And then I had this chug put into my mouth, down my throat, and this helmet put on. So then we go through this scenario like being raised, and we're looking at this we're like in this massive arena. And in this arena is this like big screen. And it's putting all this information, of like battle skills and weaponry, and in front of his eyes, on this screen sort of thing. And so it's going through, sort of like how to use these weapons, about the enemies, what the enemies look like. Just bear with us a minute. It's in that book, by the way. And that's the tunnel that I went through. It's not exactly like that. Somebody else drew that, but not exactly the same. So what it is we've got all these different aliens and their allies. So it's showing the screen is showing that the enemies and their allies, So and most of the time there were different type of like these creatures like dragons. They were like half human, half dragon. Not all the time, because sometimes we came across these tall creatures with like they looked more Slavic looking. Sometimes we had some aliens what were like with blonde hair, you know, and then we'd have the alien greys, you know, and then there were quite a different, you know, array of, you know, different sort of like races, you know. But the thing is, they were all working alongside Americans, they were working alongside with the British, Europe, Russia, you know, and it's almost like each country, some countries had been working with more than one alien race. You know, you might get a different political party that, you know, comes in, and they might have decided to be allies with another type of alien, which, you know, like maybe 4 years before, they wouldn't have been working with. And this was the same all around the world. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, so there's a lot of different aliens, you know, and their allies. So, and their allies are fighting also alongside them. So, you know, and there's a war going on. And there's no doubt in my mind that, you know, I always say that when you're taken and you're abducted, you know, there's a clue. It's not for any good, as it, you know, as the word abduction, taken without consent, you know. So I mean, it's like I know I hear people that's never been abducted, that have never seen aliens, that have never seen a UFO, telling me about my story, about what it's all about. How does that work? Yeah. How can you tell me if you've never been abducted? How can if you've never been in a craft? You know what I mean? Sort of like to me, I'm just listening. You know, you've heard of tomfoolery. You know what I mean? And sort of like, and there's a lot of people out there, you know, and I see them talking at conferences, and you've only got to look at them, and you know that it's BS. That, you know, one of the things what happens when you're abducted, right? Yeah, you become ill physically and mentally. You become ill, and one of the reasons is for this. You've been taken out of your comfort zone, put into a war zone because we're talking about aliens taking us for reasons. And at least you're lucky if you've been taken as a soldier, because some of the people that are taken never come back. They're used in, you could say, like a sex slave. They've been used for food. This isn't a game. We're talking about a war. The same thing that's going on in every country around the world, yeah, is going on with them in other planets and on this planet, because a lot of what's happening on this planet is down to them. So what happens is, because you've been taken, a lot of this becomes, you're physically taken, but it has an effect on the system. So what happens is you start being ill. Now, I've come across in my research now of people that have been abducted that have ended up having something called, either, it was known in the early days as ME. Have you heard of it? It's myalgia encephalitis. Then they changed the name from ME to fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. There's quite a few other names. Burnout. Some people put it and class it very similar alongside post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yep.
So, but it's partly that, and it's partly because we have been taken and we've gone through time. Now, when we have a system, when we go, when we're taken, when we're going on a mission, we go through this gateway. By this system, which is like two crystal balls that come up out of the ground on these like on top of the like tube objects. And when it energizes from these two objects underneath, they're like poles. When it energizes the balls, these crystal balls, and these tubes go back down, we cup his hands and put them over the top, and basically we're gone. It might only take us a split second. Sometimes it might take us maybe 1 or 2 or 3, 4, 5 seconds to go from A to B. That might be from some part of my planet to another part of the planet. It might be to back up to one of the craft that we're actually orbiting in, or it might be going to the planet there or the aliens' home planet, or we might be going to another planet where there's a battle. So all this is us basically. It's a form of teleportation. You can call it teleportation. You can call it time travel because it's the same thing. It's the same kind of thing. Now, but one of the things what we had, and I hear people talking about shadow people. Now, on our uniform, there's 2 dials. Now, the bottom dial, there's a button that you press in. You turn the dial and you press a button in. Now, what that is, it's a bit like a clock. And what it happens is you can walk through solid matter. Once that button's in, you can press it in and you can let go and it pops out. You've got to be very careful because if you let that button out, when you're halfway through a solid object, you're dead. That's it. Right, yeah, so you've got to be very, very careful. So what happens is you've got this button pressed in and you're walking through solid objects. And after you've come out of those solid objects, if that button's still pressed in on the timer, or even if you've still got it pressed in and you're looking around just to make sure there's no enemy around, what happens is you become a little bit like a silhouette. You see the outline of your figure. So some people, you can say that they're called the shadow people. So I know for certain some people call us shadow people. And what it is, they're seeing us, right, yeah, using this technology. So that is just one thing to think about. So I've used this system many times. You know, sort of like sometimes you use it when you've got to get out of trouble. You know, like if you're being attacked and you cannot get out of a situation. I remember my gun, my rifle was smashed, and I had no alternative to press the button in and to run for it. You know, otherwise I'd have just been left for dead. You know, so yeah, that is something which always makes me feel sick though. You know, when I use this, you know, like when we're time traveling or we're using, like I say, this system, you know, for teleporting, I always have this like sickly feeling when I'm using it, you know. So then what happened was from just being sat down in these chairs, what happens next is when we're taken in this chair and what have you, have this injection, the next thing we're standing in this big room with a checkerboard floor. And we're stripped and what have you. We have this mist all around us, which is like a shower. And then it's like a blow dry, you know, a dryer on you, and you're dried. And then we get these uniforms given, which are really thin material, and you put them on, and it almost just joins when you put it on, and it's sort of like it fits. We turn this knob around, and as we're turning it, it goes from white to yellow to green to blue to black, and all the time it's getting tighter, and it's an amazing feeling when you've got this. It's like when you've got this suit on, it's like you feel invincible. I can't explain it unless you've been taken. You'll know what I'm talking about, but it's like an invincible feeling, power that sort of like you just feel it through your body. So then we're given a helmet and we're told never ever pick one of the weapons up without first having an helmet on. Make sure it's never got a battery in because the batteries look like an actual magazine for a rifle. But what it is when it slots in, that's the power pack. Because what they have, there's two lots. There's one that have lasers, but initially it's a sound weapon. But underneath, on the other rifles, they had to put that were a sound weapon, but they had to put a laser pack, a laser blaster later on underneath. So yeah, two weapons. Now, usually those weapons, what we use with the sound, are for like the big creatures, which are like half human, half dragon. Some people call them Dragos. There's different types. There's white, there's green, there's browny red. There's a bluey type. But these creatures can only be killed by this sound weapon. But for good measures, I'd always give it a blast with with one of the other alternatives as well, because you would not want one of these grabbing hold of you. And I shouldn't really joke about it, but so that's a weaponry, like it's a weapon, a sound weapon, and a blaster, laser blast weapon, a laser cannon. And the helmets, it's like not music, but when you put them on, it is like music. But if you fire one of the rifles and you haven't got an helmet on, it'll burst your eardrum. Now I had an accident and one of the weapons went off and my helmet were half off over my right ear. So I have a lot of problems out of my right ear at the moment. I have had for years after it happened. Almost went deaf. Some days I have bad days with my hearing, my right ear in particular. So yeah, so we've been looking for some of the bases on this planet because they've got bases which there's still some that are secret locations that haven't been located yet. There's also some on other planets that we haven't found. But I don't think I'm going to be finding them now. I think I'm too old. I haven't been taken for a long time now. And I don't want to be either. These days I prefer to be left alone. But like I say, there's a lot of things involved here. It's not just aliens, it's different countries around the world. It's people making pacts with them. And, a lot of this is a lot of, you could call it slavery, is still going on. That they're wanting, these creatures, women, sex objects, slaves, they want slavery to do manual tasks and what have you in a lot of mines, around the universe and what have you. Food as well. That's another thing. These things, will eat humans, but they're not the only creatures that'll eat humans. There's other types of alien, these big things like jelly sort of creatures. They'll eat anything, sort of like, but unfortunately, one of their favorite foods, sort of like humans. So it's, all in all, it is not a good thing, you know. Um, I've been researching now for like 30 years, this subject. And one of the reasons really why I got into researching was because being an abductee, you know, you're wanting answers. But the problem is, sort of like, you know, let's just say there's a lot of people that repeat other stories. They might see a book, and it's a bestseller, and all of a sudden, what they do is they become repeaters. So they'll say, oh, they'll repeat almost the old book as if it's them. You know what I mean? And you can ask them any questions, but unless it's in the book, they can't tell you the answers. They can't tell you the answers unless it's written down in the book, somewhere. They cannot give you answers. Now, one of the things that happened to me, because I had 100% memory recall, I should say, which is that I lost my memory. Or I should say, I didn't lose it. Somebody took my memory. And what happened was I was talking to my dad. He'd come in from the shop. I said I'd make him a drink of tea. He'd gone into his room and taken his papers. And he left me a couple of papers, Sunday morning papers. And I was just reading. I put the kettle on and I was just reading. And all of a sudden, as I'm reading, I'm aware that I'm struggling to read. And I'm feeling really odd. And it's like I couldn't read, and I don't know what was going on. It was really a real strange. And my dad asked if I were all right. And I was talking to my dad in riddles. I was speaking to him and I wasn't making any sense. And he said to me, "Are you all right?" And I just said to him, "No." Because I couldn't communicate with him. Everything what I was saying was coming out backwards. It were all like, you've heard of the word gobbledygook, the word gobbledygook. I just was not making any sense. So anyway, he shouted up to me mum. It was Sunday morning, only time my mum got to have a lie in. And he says, "Rita," he said, "I'm going to have to take our Russ to hospital." He said, "I think there's something wrong with him." So anyway, I got taken to hospital and they looked at me in my eyes and everything. And they said, "Look, we're going to have to keep him in." They did x-rays and body scans, brain scans on me. Anyway, they came back and they said, we don't like the look of him. They said, "We don't know what it is, but there's something not quite right." Anyway, basically, I was put into one of these isolation wards because they didn't know what it was. They said, "Does he take drugs?" My dad said, "I don't think he does, no." Has he taken anything? Has he swallowed anything? Has he been beaten up? Because it was like, I didn't know where I was. Could I head injuries? He said, "No." He said, "We're talking to him. We were all right." And the next thing. So, anyway, I was in hospital 3 days and they could not understand what it was. But by that time, a lot of my memory and a lot of the things about my abduction, I couldn't remember. So something somehow had come along and had taken away a big part of my memory. Why? Why would that happen? But I could almost feel it, like it was like being pulled out. I could almost feel it being pulled out of me, like that sort of thing. it was one of the most terrifying things I can honestly say that I've ever had happen to me. You know, it was bad enough meeting these aliens. That terrified me. You know, but my goodness, you know, um, I thought I was dying. Well, I think the hospital thought I was when I was, when I was taken in. You know, sort of like it wasn't good whatsoever. You know, and then I started when I came out of hospital. I started again. You know, like being ill, not well at all. You know, and that's when I started looking for answers. But also when I started looking for answers, I got a video camera and I started going out and filming these things. So I've got a lot of video footage of like UFOs, you know, sort of like alien craft. Me getting zapped by a UFO I'm filming, I get zapped by this object. It shoots down like six balls of light at me, you know. Filmed like flying men, dolphins in the sky, you know, quite a lot of different UFOs, you know, over the years, and still do. So, you know, I mean, that's about it, really. I mean, you know, being taken and put into a military unit, you know, to fight alongside these aliens against their enemies, you know, and that's really, you know, what I was in the unit, Omega unit, and we're T, which is telepaths. But most of the telepaths that look after that planet and look after the bases for the aliens that abduct us, I won't use the names or anything, are all women. And the specialists are all women because the women from Earth, they have the ability to be able to see these Dragos and the other aliens. At least some of them are 15 minutes, but mostly 30 minutes before they turn up using the technology, this teleportation system. They know a good 30 minutes before that they're going to come through a certain area. And they're all female, but there's a lot of males as well, but mostly females from Earth are the ones that are the special guards that are trained because they've got this telepathic ability to pick up on, you know, when they're using, or even if they've got through, they know when they're about. So if they've already got through and teleported to an area, they'll know where they are. They can pick them up like that, like radar. They can say, you know, they're around now, they're here, you know, and then they'll look for them, you know. So, you know, like I say, but we've been looking for one or two different areas of concern on this planet as well. And what they are special, well, these areas of interest, which we've been looking for because there's like secret areas and they seem to have like some kind of invisible, an area where there's like an invisible sort of like fortress. And there's one or two of them apparently on this planet, what we're looking for. And other planets as well. But the ones on this planet, obviously, you know, like to us, we need to find them, you know. There is a school of thought that says wherever there's a battle or a war that starts to take place, that sometimes that some of this technology is being used in these areas and they try shift it, they try to get out of that area, and move to another area. So that's just a school of thought.
Very good.
So I don't know whether that's any use to you, or if you've got any questions, or
I don't know if anybody has any questions, they can put their hands up, or anybody in the audience can ask, I assume. Anybody has any questions in the chat room, they can raise their hand and I'll let Tom answer. Okay, we got a question from JL wants to know, what do you think was in the injections?
I'm only having a guess that maybe to stop me from vomiting, maybe a stabilizer, because like I said to you earlier, that really when you look at the reality of this, what is being done is that we're traveling, and it's like we're teleported. You can call it teleportation, time travel, and maybe some kind of stabilizer, for us bodies to travel in this way. I know that I must admit, every time I travel, when I'm taken, when we're using this technology, sort of like I always feel sick. So whether it's to stop us, if from vomiting or whatever, if it's some kind of stabilizer, um, I'm presuming obviously it's something to stabilize us bodies when we're being teleported or time traveling. If that makes any
Okay,
sense.
and B wants to, oh yes. And B wants to know where you're actually fighting battles, and if so, where on Earth or someplace else?
All over. Oh, we've fought battles on Earth. In fact, I was talking about 5 years ago when we were in Eastern Europe, and I was talking on an internet channel. Didn't go down too well actually, because people that had been previously reasonable to chat to on this station, on this radio show, were just treating me like a fool. And I was saying that, we were wearing a different uniform from that country. And there were people saying, like, you're not from this country, you're wearing these uniforms, you're not from around here, you know.
And C wants to know, why did the aliens choose to use humans for battle? And what are their battles about?
Why are they using a Sabal?
Right.
Well, I know that the specific group that abduct me and a lot of the people from around the world, they're not warlike creatures. So they might look it to look at them, but they're not warlike creatures. And we've been called in to help them, against these people that are trying to destroy their planet and themselves also. Whether it makes it right or wrong remains to be seen. I always have this opinion that, abduction is abduction. It's been taken without consent. But you'll always get the people that have never been abducted, have never seen a UFO, that'll always try telling you, sort of like, oh, well, this is what it's about. Well, how do you know that if you've never been abducted? Yeah. And they're telling us, oh, well, before you was born, you'd said yes to this. How then? How do you know that? For goodness sake, if you've got an answer or you think you have, it's like, don't let it go into the realms of stupidity and make believe. Sort of like, if you're going to answer a question, answer it with some kind of reality. But the problem is with a lot of people, they'll read other people's books on this subject, and then they'll start churning out their BS, their rubbish, you know what I mean? And sort of like it hasn't happened to them, and it'll never happen to them. And the thing is, they need to shut their mouths and thank themselves lucky that it hasn't happened to them. Because to be honest, it's not a good thing. I mean, you wake up every day and you're thinking of this subject, you're thinking about aliens day in, day out. And this has been me since I was 16. That can't be good for anybody.
It's like this, unless you wear the shoes, you don't know the whole story.
No. And the problem is, and this is a problem, because of what happened, and having this memory taken from me, not all of it, but there's things that I've had taken, and I'm wanting the answers back. I was told by somebody, oh, I must admit, I've become to see what they're saying now after years. It's saying perhaps you don't want to know us. Perhaps you really don't know, and you don't really want to know why, because it might not be good. I don't like the sound of that, but I can understand what they're saying.
Have you learned has anything positive came out of this? Have you taken anything positive from your experiences?
Trust no one. And if anybody from the government tells you that they know what's going on, right, yeah, don't believe. Don't believe. I mean, we're talking the other day to a TV channel, and they're wanting to see, like video footage. They always want to see video footage, and it always has to be a flying saucer for some reason or a flying triangle. And they were talking about this, oh, you've seen the TikToks, sort of like Tic Tacs, any craft like that. There was, and they're saying new footage like that, new footage. And I'm saying the footage you're talking about is very low grade. It's not very good to start off with. And it comes from 2006. Talking about old footage. There's people, my ex-girlfriend, she filmed a Tic Tac um, outside my house about 2 years ago, and sort of like, and they weren't interested. I don't, sometimes you wonder how these people's minds work. You know what I mean? I've got all sorts of video footage. I've been zapped by UFOs when I've been filming. I filmed like things like dolphins in the sky, and flying men. Sort of like all sorts of very strange, craft. Sort of like, you know. And I'm just starting to go out and film more now. Now it's getting better weather, hopefully.
Anybody in the audience or anybody in the chat room have any questions? I had a question about you said the video is not any good that you captured.
Sorry, say again, sorry.
Somebody in the chat room said the video that you have is not any good. Is that what you're saying? The video you captured?
The video I captured are up on YouTube.
Okay.
If you put Russ Kellett, Flying Saucer Television, um, I'm looking at making a new YouTube now. But that's a lot of the old stuff. But now I'm starting to use CCTV camera because there's things around my house. But to be quite honest, CCTV camera's okay, but I prefer to go out and actually look and see something physically in front of my eyes instead of using, surveillance camera. I'm sort of like old school, I think. You get a lot more satisfaction if something turns up when you're out on a sky watch, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, they say your eyes, ears, and nose are your best tools you have. So
Oh yeah, yeah. Sort of like like you say, it's like radar. You get a radar, you know when they're about. You just know when they're about. They'll turn up if they're gonna turn up, they'll turn up.
question is, why do the aliens choose humans for battle?
Because if you look at humans, there's always been humans fighting wars since time began. You know, from battling just to survive against dinosaurs and other creatures to fighting against other tribes. It's what the people on this planet do, and it's what they do best. And unfortunately, since time begun on this planet, I don't think there's been any time where there hasn't been a war in a country that's taken place right here since time began. It's what humans do best, unfortunately. Killing machines.
If you had to ask, if you had to tell everybody here, one thing about your abduction, one of the most important things, what would you tell them?
An important thing to tell them that these things are real, you know, and they need to stop.
Anybody have questions in the chat room they want to add, or anybody in the audience want to say anything? Have you learned anything from all of this? Is there anything that you gained or learned from all of this over the years?
Well, yeah, that we're not alone. There's something definitely taking people. These things are real, and sort of like there's a war. There's a war going on, and unfortunately, sort of like it's not a nice thing to say, but that's just it. There is a war going on. There's more than one type of alien creature that's involved. There's many, and there's many different countries that are involved in this around the world. And that's why the truth can't come out.
Great. I 100% agree with you. Now, when you were aboard the craft, was there any other humans on the craft with you, or were you solo?
Oh no, there's quite a few. We there's groups of tens and then like groups of 100, and just depending on what we're fighting, what the numbers of the groups, of enemy that we're fighting are, depends on how many people they'll be sent. Whether it's a scout deployment or whether it's a full deployment, sort of like a battle fleet, sort of like going, just depends on what we're coming up against or what we're being sent to. But there could be, 1,000 at least, 10,000, sort of like 100,000. I mean, that's heavy duty though. That is like worst case scenario. That is when those numbers are sent out, that means that there's going to be quite a lot of casualties. Which big question is, if there's a lot of casualties, which unfortunately that I've seen, where do they come from? And if they're from Earth, could this equate to the large amounts of people around the world that go missing every year?
Somebody in the chat room wants to know how long were you away fighting? Time
Well,
frame.
it started off when I was 16 years old, up until my late 30s.
All right. So, in your estimation, just a guess, how many different races would you say is out there in our solar system?
Well, I think I'd come across at least 10 different alien races.
And you've met pretty much all 10 of those races up close?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Too close for comfort sometimes. I mean, there's 6 different types of one sort of like race, the Dragos, sort of like they're like half human, half dragon, and they're sort of like 15 foot tall, even bigger sometimes. And there's there's a green one, there's an orangey coloured one, a white one. and there's like a brownie coloured one. You know, the white ones as well. They're quite vicious. Well, they're all vicious, obviously, because that's. But someone says, you know, like to me, just because something looks evil and big and nasty, don't mean to say that, you know, like it's got bad intentions. It's wanting to survive. It's wanting to do what every other species, you know, sort of like wants to do, and that's stay alive, keep alive. Which you know, I can see that viewpoint. I can understand that.
Great, thank you. So how many other planets do you believe is out there? I know there's talk about other planets just like Earth. Do you believe there's other planets out there besides Earth?
Oh heck yeah! I mean, as far as something that I was looking at, and I remember having a conversation and saying, you know, like about the planets and all the planets inhabited by creatures, and just because they're not like you and me, you know, sort of like humanoid creatures, you know, doesn't mean to say they don't live on these planets. They might be harsh for us to live on, but nevertheless, there is a form of civilization on all of the planets.
How long have these battles been going on for?
Oh.
Christine wants to know.
They must have been going on for a long time. They must have been going on for a long time, you know, which it always makes me wonder why, you know, sort of like, you know, why isn't something happened? Why hasn't it stopped? You know, I mean, I hear a lot of people talking about this. Oh, what do you call it now? They always come out with these things like there's a big group of it's intelligent aliens all sat around the table for the good of aliens and mankind, and you know, like a galactic federation. I can honestly say I've seen nothing of a galactic federation. Believe me, seen nothing of anything like a galactic federation. You know,
Right. I know some of the races I've encountered. One of them being the Council of Eight. Have you ever been in contact with the Council of Eight or anything close to
no,
it? No.
no. It's something like I say, you know, sort of like I can only really talk about things that have happened and what I've experienced. You know what I mean? Um, if other people have, well, yeah, it's not what I've come across. You know, which always makes me wonder how comes I haven't. If you know what I mean, I always sort of like wonder, well, how comes? Because a lot of things don't make sense. A lot of things that I read about, you know, sort of like, and I have over the years, I've just, you know, like it don't make any sense to me. You know, sort of like why is, you know what I mean? And if it don't make any sense, I just go, well, I'll just put it on back burner until maybe something happens and I can say, well, I can understand that now. You know what I mean? Don't write it off, but don't, you know, put it on back burner, put it up here thinking, right, if something happens now and that comes up, you're going to have to look at it seriously, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. So
You know,
looking back at all this, do you have any thoughts as to why you were chosen for all of this? As it, you think you were just centered out for a certain reason, or
there's only one thing I can think of, and it's like I was saying earlier on about my dad. Um, he uh, he was in a unit and they were working on atom bombs in 50s. And I've got a picture of him, and I've got a picture of him in uniform, and I've got a picture of an atom bomb going off where he was at the time, you know. And they were telling, I only found out. in my 40s about this. Right, yeah. Because one of his comrades had come to see him. I didn't even know he were in tank regiment, you know. And I heard a right story, you know, sort of like a lot of laughing and joking as comrades, you know, like, and do you remember this, Jim? Do you remember that? Oh, yeah. Well, do you remember that atom bomb test what you're involved in? Oh, he said, Jim, I'm glad I wasn't involved in any of that, you know. And he says, oh, he says, yeah. And he said, I've got some photographs for you. My dad said, what? And he said, I've got some photographs that I took, and they took around at the time with you in your uniform, and it has atomic umpire on his uniform, and this atom bomb going off. And I mean, like, I just couldn't believe it. So the only thing I can think of, yeah, is it because my dad were in an atom bomb test that it had physiological changes in him? And then because he had a kid with my mum, i.e. me, is that why oh, he's a bit different. Look at he's almost, you know, sort of like radiating, you know, sort of like power from his body. You know what I mean? In other words, radiation. Oh dear. You know what I mean? Could that be why? Something plain and simple as that. Could it be a case of that they've gone, oh, you know, he looks a bit different to the rest of them. You know, sort of like that's the only reason I can think.
I think you very well could be right. I've done some cases where military people and people who make devices such as bombs and different things have had more visitation than say other people. So
Right. So I think that could be maybe the answer. Why would they want to take me? I don't think I'd make a good soldier anyway. You know, I have too much of a silly side to me. I like jokes. I like a laugh. I'm not into fighting, although I've used firearms. I've got I used to have weapons and what have you for target practice. You know, like and shooting. That were my favourite hobby. Shooting targets, not people, not animals or anything. Targets. I used to love that. You know, but as a soldier, that's not me. You know.
right. And we're getting close to the end of our time here. Do you have any closing remarks or anything you want to add before we leave?
No, just it's been a great show, and thank you for having me on. And you know, I hope people have some interest anyway. But yeah, it's been a great show, Chris, and thanks for having me on your show.
We appreciate having you here. All of us appreciate having you here, and you in the audience in the chat room. Everybody had a great time. Your speech was very wonderful.
Well, thank you very much.
Keep your eyes on the skies, everybody, and we'll see you next time. You're out here. Bye-bye. I have no idea what you're about.